She did not know it yet, but the moment Flavia Tersa stepped across her husband's threshold, Rome had already begun remaking her. The torches flickered against marble walls, their flames throwing warped silhouettes that stretched and twisted like spirits trying to escape. Her bare feet whispered across the cold floor. Her hands trembled violently despite her efforts to keep them still. Behind her, 7 witnesses stood in rigid silence, faces half-lit, half-shadowed, watching her with the same detached curiosity one might give a ritual sacrifice. She had been told this was tradition. She had been told every bride before her had done the same. She had been told that refusal would dishonour her father, end her marriage before it began, and brand her as unfit for any man in Rome. But no one had told her what the tradition actually required. Not until tonight. Not until the cloth was lifted from the wooden structure in the corner, revealing the secret the Roman world fought for centuries to bury. 18-year-old Flavia Tersa lived in the 49th year of Emperor Domitian's reign, an age of marble temples, triumphal arches, legal precision and polished brutality. Rome was a world that worshipped order, ownership, lineage, a world where marriages were not unions of affection, but transactions of bodies and bloodlines, a world where a bride's silence spoke louder than her voice. Tonight, Flavia was about to learn that the real wedding, the one no poet sang about, the one no historian dared to fully describe, did not happen beneath bright garlands and saffron veils. It happened here, in a sealed room, under the eyes of strangers who would later swear in court that what had occurred was lawful, proper and complete. Hours earlier, Rome had celebrated her. The streets were thick with crowds singing feccine verses, raucous, obscene, deliberately humiliating songs hurled at brides to ward off evil spirits. Young men shouted suggestions of what Marcus Petronius Rufus, her husband, would do to her that night. Their laughter followed her like smoke, rising above the clatter of sandals and tambourines. Her flame-coloured veil, symbol of fire and fertility, glowed in the afternoon light. 6 braids bound with wool ribbons hung over her shoulders exactly as tradition demanded. A lamb had been sacrificed. Its entrails were red for signs of favour. Her father had signed the contracts transferring her from his authority to Marcus's, using the ancient legal formula that made the shift in ownership absolute. She had spoken her single required line. Ubi tu Gaius, ego Gaia, a phrase that stripped away her identity and replaced it with her husband's. But that public ceremony, that careful display of cheer and piety, was nothing more than paperwork. The true transformation would occur away from the cheering crowds, in a chamber where Roman law met Roman custom, where a woman's worth was measured, inspected, recorded, and confirmed. As her procession neared her husband's home, the sun was slipping away, turning the sky a bruised purple. 2 torches burned at the doorway, the sign that this was a threshold of consummation. Someone threw walnuts at her, symbols of fertility, tokens of childhood discarded. They clattered across the marble like bones. Her mother walked beside her, face pulled tight, eyes red from tears shed in private. Earlier that morning, while tying the final braid, her mother had whispered the only warning she dared give. Do not resist. Whatever they require, do not resist. Flavia had not understood then. Now, standing in the atrium, she understood far too well. The door shut behind her, cutting off the last echoes of Rome's coarse celebration. Before her stood an assembly of figures positioned with ritual precision. An elderly pronuba, the woman responsible for overseeing the consummation, 3 female slaves holding basins and cloths, a priest whose expression flickered with unease, an older man whose leather bag of metal instruments identified him instantly, a physician, and in the far corner, covered by a drape, the 4-foot structure she'd been told nothing about. The pronuba stepped forward, her grip firm, almost restraining. "Welcome to your husband's home," she said. "The sacred rites must now be completed." Sacred. The word tasted like iron. To understand what Flavia faced, one must understand Roman marriage not as romance, not as partnership, but as contract, conventio in manum, the transfer of a woman into the hand of the husband. It was the same phrase used in the sale of land, livestock, or slaves. A wife was legal property, and property had to be inspected, documented, certified before possession changed hands. The Romans, masters of precision, left nothing ambiguous, especially the production of legitimate heirs. A bride's virginity, therefore, was not a private matter, it was a legal claim, a guarantee of untainted bloodline, and like all legal claims in Rome, it had to be proven. The pronuba guided Flavia toward the draped shape in the corner. Flavia could feel the witnesses watching, measuring her fear, perhaps judging it, perhaps enjoying it. When her fingers touched the fabric, her throat closed. She pulled the cloth away. Underneath stood a wooden figure carved with anatomical perfection into the shape of a phallus. Far larger than anything she had imagined, far more detailed, polished with ritual oil to a sheen that reflected the torchlight. It was not symbolic. It was not decorative. It was a device with a purpose. The pronuba's voice dropped into the cadence of memorized liturgy. "You must greet Mutinus Tutinus," she said. "You must offer yourself as tradition requires before your husband may approach." Mutinus Tutinus, Rome's god of initiation, the deity brides were presented to before consummation. A god mentioned in ancient texts so cautiously, so ashamedly, that many historians once believed he was metaphorical. But he was real. The ritual was real. And what the church fathers later described with horror, Rome had practiced as casually as breathing. Flavia felt herself sway. The pronuba steadied her, positioned her, murmured instructions that made Flavia's skin crawl. The witnesses watched in total silence, because they were not there for modesty, or comfort, or support. They were there to testify, to record, to ensure the ritual happened exactly as law and custom required. What Flavia performed next was the same action countless Roman brides had performed before her, actions written about only in fragments, by men who could not bring themselves to describe what they had seen. St. Augustine, writing centuries later, condemned the practice, calling it obscene, degrading, wicked. Arnobius hinted at penetration. Lactantius refused to describe the details at all, insisting that even naming the ritual polluted the speaker. Varro, the only Roman author who mentioned Mutinus Tutinus without Christian outrage, spoke so vaguely that it took centuries for scholars to understand what he was implying. But Flavia understood instantly. When the ritual was completed, the slaves washed her with scented water. The pronuba murmured blessings, though her voice carried no warmth. The physician approached for the expected examination, a procedure performed as routinely as checking a horse's teeth before purchase. Earlier that day, he'd confirmed Flavia's virginity. Now he confirmed the ritual's effect. His notes would become legal evidence. Flavia clenched her jaw so hard her teeth throbbed. She did not speak. She did not cry. Roman brides were trained for silence, and silence was expected, especially now. With the ritual and examination complete, she was led into the bedchamber. The door would remain open all night, because consummation was not a private act. It was a final verification. The pronuba stood positioned at the entrance. The witnesses waited just beyond. Slaves held linens prepared for what would follow, and Marcus Petronius Rufus, her husband of a single day, entered looking oddly nervous, as if he too sensed that what was about to occur had less to do with desire than with duty, law, and expectation. The pronuba's voice cut through the stillness. Let the marriage be fulfilled according to the laws of Rome. Let witnesses verify the act. Let no doubt remain that this woman is now a wife. The torches crackled. The room tightened around her. And as Marcus approached the bed, Flavia Tersa understood fully, perhaps for the first time in her life, that her body was no longer her own. It belonged to the law, to her husband, to Rome itself. What happened that night forged the foundation of her future. But the night was not over. Rome's rituals had only begun. At some point in the night, time stopped behaving normally. Minutes bled into hours, and hours stretched into something shapeless and airless. The open doorway framed the pronuba like a sentinel carved from marble, her posture never shifting, her expression never softening. She was there not to protect Flavia, but to protect the law, to ensure that nothing occurred outside the strict boundaries of Roman custom. Everything had to be visible. Everything had to be verifiable. Even the shadows seemed to report back to the witnesses waiting just beyond the threshold. Marcus moved stiffly beside Flavia, driven not by desire but by the crushing weight of expectation. A Roman husband who failed to consummate his marriage could be humiliated, mocked, stripped of the status expected of a man. The pressure was not hers alone. Rome demanded performance from them both. Flavia lay beneath him, staring past his shoulder at the flickering lamplight, feeling her breath come in shallow bursts. The priest had retreated into the atrium, but she could still hear him murmuring a prayer to Juno Lucina, goddess of childbirth, the patron of wives, the silent overseer of this ritual. The sound was low and steady, as if he feared that refusing to utter it would invite divine retribution. Marcus's hands trembled as he touched her, and for a fleeting moment she realized he was frightened too. Not of hurting her, not of the ritual, but of failing Rome, of failing the witnesses, of failing the legal machine that turned their bodies into evidence. When he looked at her, it was not with cruelty. It was with a man's quiet dread of being judged less than what society demanded he be. The consummation was slow, awkward, painfully observed. The pronoba occasionally murmured instructions. Position her knee so, adjust the lamp, turn her slightly, like a trainer directing a ceremonial performance. The door remained open, its darkness a